Hello and welcome to the NEWSMAX Daily for Tuesday, October 8th, 2024, the second of 5 Tuesdays this month, the 41st of the year, and the 282nd day of 2024, with 84 days to go.
It took us 4.5 hours to go 60 miles.
The largest mass evacuation in years is underway in the state of Florida as Hurricane Milton approaches the state's west coast. Currently, a Category 4 storm with sustained winds of around 140 miles per hour. This after intensifying from a Category 1 to a Category 5 in one day yesterday. Think L.A., Houston rush hour, the entrance to the Midtown Tunnel in New York City, the High Five in Dallas, downtown Atlanta. That's what I-75, Interstate 75 on Florida's west coast has looked like since yesterday. Hurricane Milton is now expected to make landfall Wednesday overnight into Thursday near Tampa Bay with up to 15 inches of rain possible and 15-foot storm surge. Governor DeSantis in this morning's briefing.
Looking at how big this storm is, there's going to be significant damage in different parts of Florida. And it's not just going to be with the surge. That will be probably the worst. But this storm is going to go through the peninsula as a hurricane. And you're going to have hurricane force winds on the east coast of Florida.
So it's going to be catastrophic along most of the west coast of Florida, especially in Tampa. But there's a lot of areas there that are still recovering from the flooding of Hurricane Helene. Meanwhile, former President Donald Trump, who lives on the east coast of Florida, was at his golf club in Miami yesterday, marking the one-year anniversary of the terror attack on Israel.
The anti-Jewish hatred has returned even here in America, in our streets, our media, and our college campuses, and within the ranks of the Democrat Party in particular. Not in the Republican Party, I will tell you that. It's not in the Republican Party. We will remove the jihadist sympathizers and Jew haters. We're going to remove the Jew haters who do nothing to help our country. They only want to destroy our country.
President Biden and the First Lady also delivered remarks on Israel, but Vice President Harris, the Democratic nominee for president, wasn't there. She delivered remarks outside the White House in her own event.
So as we reflect on the horrors of October 7, let us please be reminded that we cannot lose faith. The Jewish philosopher Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote, and I quote, "Religion begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us." So in this moment, on the one-year commemoration of October 7, what is asked of us? What is asked of us? First and foremost, I believe that we must never forget. I will never forget October 7, and the world must never forget. What is asked of us? We must work to ensure nothing like the horrors of October 7 can ever happen again. And on this solemn day, I will restate my pledge to always ensure that Israel has what it needs to defend itself, and that I will always work to ensure the safety and security of the Jewish people here and around the world. What is asked of us? We must reunite the hostages held in Gaza with their families, and I will never stop fighting for the release of all the hostages, including the American citizens, living and deceased. Omer, Idan, Sagi, Keith, Judy, God, and Ite. What is asked of us? We must uphold the commitment to repair the world.
Vice President Harris outside the White House yesterday. Her 60 Minutes interview that I talked about yesterday ran last night. Former Arkansas governor and former presidential candidate Mike Huckabee was on Wake Up America to discuss the Israel-Hamas war and the vice president's response to the question about the Israeli prime minister, which you will hear again in this segment. I played it yesterday, but if you missed it, you'll hear it again in this segment.
Governor, great to see you. I know that you have visited the places that were destroyed by those Hamas terrorists 1 year ago today. You've been a steadfast supporter and friend of Israel. I know this is a tough day for the Israeli people and all of those still without loved ones who were taken hostage by Hamas. What should Americans remember about this day?
What they need to remember is that this was a brutal and vicious, horrific attack against civilians. This was not an act of war. This was an act of desperate terrorism on behalf of Hamas, financed by Iran, who had the money because we removed the sanctions from them that were bankrupting them. Mm-hmm. The United States has some complicity simply because by our making it possible for Iran to have the money, once Joe Biden's administration took those sanctions off, they financed Hezbollah, they financed the Houthis, they financed Hamas. And that horrific action of a year ago today, which murdered 1,200 innocent Israeli citizens, is something that is a horrible dark spot in all of human history. And we should never forget it, and we should never stop supporting Israel's right to defend itself, protect its people and its land, and to push back not just against Hamas and Hezbollah, but to go against Iran. They have to do it. They have no choice.
Yeah, you make up such a great point. So Kamala Harris, she sat down for a 60 Minutes interview. She was asked about Benjamin Netanyahu being a close ally, and here is how she responded. Take a listen.
Do we have a real close ally in Prime Minister Netanyahu?
I think, with all due respect, the better question is, do we have an important alliance between the American people and the Israeli people? And the answer to that question is yes.
Governor, my jaw dropped when I saw that. She would not call the current prime minister of Israel an ally. What did you make of that? And what message does that send to the people of Israel?
You know, Charlotte, that was disgusting, and it's a disqualifying answer for her to ever be president. For her to say that about the prime minister, let's make it clear, the duly elected prime minister of our closest ally, is revolting. And she ought to be ashamed of herself. She ought to correct it. She won't. She won't have to. I don't know who she's pitching that to, but it's a disgusting affront to every person who values the idea that people get to elect their government. Mm-hmm. Would love to ask her, where else in the Middle East is that happening? Did the Ayatollahs get elected? Do the leaders of Hezbollah and Hamas, do they get elected by the people that they're supposed to serve? Benjamin Netanyahu has led this country through a horrific situation. He's done it with a sense of intention and purpose. And I think we saw with the incredible Mossad operation with the pagers in Hezbollah, an ingenious approach to it. What we've got to do is stand with Israel right now and recognize that the Iranians and their regime, it's not just Israel they want to destroy. They want us too. And if we don't stop them now, we'll be fighting them here.
Governor Mike Huckabee, the huckster, on Wake Up America with Charla McBride. And don't forget, Rob Finnerty, now the former co-host of Wake Up America, will be hosting his own show, Finnerty, debuting at 8 o'clock tonight. That's 8 o'clock Eastern on NEWSMAX. Greta Van Susteren has also traveled to Israel this year and many times in the past.
For almost a year, I've been trying to figure out why this war in Israel is so tough for me, so haunting. Of course, all war is horrible, and I've been to or covered wars or their aftermaths in many places over many years: Iraq, Sudan, Afghanistan, Ukraine. And of course, I've seen up close all the heartache of those wars. But this war in Israel, it's been the toughest for me. I keep asking myself, why would one war haunt me more than another? I've gone over the possibilities. Perhaps because I get to wars after they've started and I'm cautious to stay a safe distance. But this time it is different. I'm not hearing about the atrocities from others. That's because of what Hamas did. I actually got to see in real time, as they committed their atrocities, the Hamas terrorists wore GoPro video cameras on their heads so they could film in real time their vicious acts of genocide. The Israelis were able to see some of the cameras, so many of us have now watched the video. The video is 47 minutes of horror of their massacre. The massacre lasted even much longer. Hamas slaughtered babies in front of their parents, slaughtered parents in front of their children. In one video clip, Hamas is seen beheading an Israeli slowly, while other Hamas terrorists cheered on the sidelines. The massacre, all filmed by Hamas, went on for hours. I can easily imagine many about to be slaughtered themselves, hearing their neighbors screaming as they were shot or burned to death. In the video, one terrorist calls his mother back home in Gaza, laughing and bragging that he killed a large number of Israelis all by himself. Yes, Hamas came well prepared to both kill and to record with glee their inhumanity. To what end? Likely two reasons: to brag like that son who called his mother, and to recruit more terrorists with that video. Watching that video of what happened in those homes on October 7th weighs heavily on me. I'm sure it likewise does for every other journalist covering this war and watching that video. What is happening in Israel is very painful, not just because of October 7th, and that is extremely painful, but because history has seen this before. Jews with no place to go, hunted down and murdered. Think about it. That tiny nation of Israel is surrounded by enemies, terrorists, who don't value life but praise killing, trying to kill them at all times from all directions, north, south, east, west. Their neighbors to their east include militant Palestinians. In the West Bank, that's where they are. They want to destroy them. Their neighbors to the west in Gaza, the Hamas terrorists. The Hamas Charter demands that Hamas destroy Israel and Jews. Israel's neighbor to the north is Lebanon, which is the host to Hezbollah. Hezbollah's arsenal of rockets is estimated to be more than 150,000. Hezbollah's goal, with that arsenal, like Hamas, is to destroy Israel and Israel's neighbor, Iran, in the neighborhood. Their leadership, what a bunch of cowards and indecent humans. They're financing these terrorist organizations, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. Iran pays for them to do their dirty work, the killing of Israeli citizens.
Greta Van Susteren on Newsmax, who went on to give a full history lesson on World War II and the persecution of Jews in that segment. I would highly encourage you to go back and watch last night's show of The Record with Greta. Very, very informative and educational. Shifting gears now back to the presidential election, Rob Schmitt has more on the vice president's 60-minute interview.
The Kamala campaign doing what it does best this week, lifting Trump's playbook. They finally figured out that laughing and ignoring the media is not going to win an election. She's going to do The View tomorrow, and then Howard Stern, and then Stephen Colbert. It's a busy Tuesday. It's also the 3 biggest softball interviews you can get in a row. Her real test, though, comes tonight. Or aside from the debate, 60 Minutes, the only tough set of questions she's faced by herself since Nancy Pelosi pulled the plug on Joe Biden and Democrats coronated her, our 28% approval-rated vice president, a couple months ago. 60 Minutes has released a few snippets of what we're going to see tonight, and there's more indications that our vice president has no business in her current job, let alone asking this country to make her the president. Here was Kamala on Benjamin Netanyahu ignoring the Biden administration and running the war in Israel the way he sees best. See if you can figure out exactly what she's trying to say here.
The work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
I guess she means we're making maybe some progress. You know, like 3 words instead of 60, but, you know, whatever. On the economy, it didn't get much better. Kamala, the empty soundbite factory that she is, still has no actual plan to change anything in your country for the better, despite the fact that we need a lot of changes, other than handing out huge loads of cash to anyone who claims that they are going to start a small business, which is a gimmick, if implemented, that will be riddled with fraud, the same kind of fraud we just saw during COVID when we decided to hand out huge amounts of cash. Bill Whitaker becoming joyful Kamala's killjoy, hitting her with the thing that pie-in-the-sky California socialists seem to hate the most, reality.
My plan is about saying that when you invest in small businesses, you invest in the middle class, and you strengthen America's economy. Small businesses are part of the backbone of America's economy.
But pardon me, Madam Vice President, the question was, how are you going to pay for it?
Well, one of the things is I'm going to make sure that the richest among us who can afford it pay their fair share in taxes.
But we're dealing with the real world here.
But the real world includes...
How are you going to get this through Congress?
She had really no answer to that at all. The real world is hitting Kamala and her campaign right between the eyes. She is not a serious candidate. This has never really been a serious campaign.
Rob Schmitt is the host of Rob Schmitt Tonight. That's 7 o'clock Eastern on Newsmax. And as of tonight, as I mentioned, it's followed by Finnerty at 8, then Greg Kelly Reports at 9. If you missed last night's edition of Greg Kelly Reports, he interviewed Republican vice presidential nominee Senator J.D. Vance, beginning with his performance at last week's debate.
Senator Vance, welcome to Newsmax, and lots to talk about. Great to see you. What were you thinking during those moments?
Well, honestly, Greg, you're so nervous. You're just trying to say something that isn't too dumb and doesn't embarrass your running mate. I definitely think we were able to get some good shots in. And the strategy that I took, Greg, going into it was I wanted to prosecute the case against Kamala Harris because, you know, whatever Tim Walz's views are on the topic of the day, it doesn't matter. Kamala Harris is the one who's actually at the top of the ticket. And she's the one who's run from her record every single step of the way, from banning fracking to defunding the police to opening the southern border. She has flipped on every single one of her major policy views over the last 3.5 years because she knows that Donald Trump's policies and record were popular and hers is unpopular. So she's trying to run away from her own record as quickly as possible. I just wanted to tie her to the truth, tie her to reality. And the moment, Greg, when I realized things had gone very well, is that when I saw my wife right after the debate, her face just lit up. She can't lie to me. It's one of her great character traits is that she just is impossibly truthful about everything. And, she definitely made it obvious to me when I saw her that she thought I had done well. And that's how I knew things had gone well.
Well, it was really something to witness. And I saw her come up to you afterwards. I was wondering what you guys were talking about. Today is October 7th. 1 year ago, Hamas, that horrific strike on Israel. Please, anything you'd like to share your thoughts about today? And can you explain, I do believe this, that this would not have happened if President Trump had been president on that day?
Yeah, Greg, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it just shows how weakness invites chaos and death and destruction. And unfortunately, we've got a lot of that across the world because Kamala Harris's veiled leadership has led to a lot of innocent people being slaughtered, a lot of wars started that would not have otherwise started. And on October the 7th, I mean, a year after this terrible attack, I think the thing that I'm thinking most about today is that we still have Americans who are being held hostage by Hamas. I mean, obviously, our hearts go out to the over 1,000 Israelis who lost their lives. But can you imagine any time in American history where you would have hostages kept by a foreign terrorist organization and the president and vice president of the United States act as if nothing had happened? You so rarely hear about these innocent people who have been living in a literal hellscape for the last year. And unfortunately, Vice President Kamala Harris seems not to care about it. When Donald Trump is president, I guarantee people are not going to be taking Americans' innocence hostage for a year with no consequences. We have got to get those people home. They deserve to be where they belong, not being terrorized by this brutal terrorist organization.
Senator Vance, you speak about God often and very, very powerfully. You did so at the Butler rally this weekend, and it was really something. I'd like to ask you about it. Go ahead and roll that tape, please.
Now, I believe, as sure as I'm standing here today, that what happened was a true miracle. And on that day, America felt the truth of Scripture. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. I truly believe that God saved President Trump's life that day. And I believe that God is with us right now and watches over this incredible nation every single day.
Senator Vance, that is not radical talk. That is beautiful. It's faith-driven, and it's kind of part of our tradition. They try to use it as a weapon against you, your faith. And I hear about Christian nationalism, which I've never heard of until liberals started talking about it. Have you noticed that?
I've heard they talk about that phrase a lot, Greg, but I think I was saying something that a lot of Americans believe, which is that God saved Donald Trump's life that day. I mean, we've all seen the clip and the footage where he turned his head just a little bit at the last second, and if he hadn't done that, he would not be standing here today. He would not be running for president, and I believe ready to win this election. And I think for a lot of us, what I take from that is that God still very much has a plan for this nation. He still cares about and directs the affairs of men. As you said, this is something that was conventional wisdom in this country for over 200 years, Democrats and Republicans. While we admit that we don't always know what God wants us to do, we're not always sure exactly what God's plan is for us. We appeal to God, recognizing that He cares about each and every single one of us, and He has a plan for this nation. And so I take inspiration from that. I take a certain humility from that I don't always know what God's plan is, but I try to walk the path that He's set as much as possible. That's not radical, I think, to 90% of Americans, Greg. That's just common sense.
Senator J.D. Vance on Greg Kelly Reports, and we'll wrap it up with Vance's comments on FEMA.
Are you satisfied? Has FEMA gotten the message? Probably not. They can't in such short order. Look, a lot of us are concerned that they're being unfair with Western North Carolina for maybe political causes. David Axelrod seems to be kind of gleeful that maybe some people in red counties might have trouble voting. How frustrated or confident are you right now in what's happening in Western North Carolina?
Well, Greg, look, I'm extremely frustrated. I think, first of all, it's a matter of focus. You have FEMA, which is there for disaster relief for American citizens after a terrible storm, being deployed repeatedly to deal with Kamala Harris's wide open border and the migrant invasion that it's caused. That lack of focus on their core mission, that distraction, and focusing instead on illegal immigrants, I guarantee that it has made the disaster response worse. But I actually think the biggest failure is from the political leadership, Greg. When you have something like this happen, you have so many bureaucratic organizations, you need leadership to cut through the red tape, to send the military to where it needs to go, to tell FAA that they need to do everything, that's the Federal Aviation Administration, that they can to get supplies in as quickly as possible. And unfortunately, when this disaster struck, Joe Biden was on a beach where he stayed for a couple of days. Kamala Harris was at a San Francisco fundraiser. The lack of leadership is why I think you have this bureaucratic incompetence, and a lot of Americans are suffering, Greg. Every single day, there are still Americans in Western North Carolina, all across Appalachia. They're not getting the help that they need because their government is failing them. And I promise you that when Donald Trump is president, you're going to have a president every single day who fights for American citizens, whatever walk of life they come from, whatever their skin color or their background. Donald Trump appreciates more than anybody that his job is to look after the American people, and that's what's going to happen when he's president.
Ohio Senator and Donald Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance. Greg Kelly mentioned voters in red states not being able to vote because of the hurricane, right? Listen to this. The federal government now says they can use FEMA trailers as polling locations in some of those areas. And North Carolina election officials are giving local election officials the power to allow voters displaced by the storm to cast ballots outside of their county. So you're registered, obviously, in the county that you live in, but now you'll be able to go vote in a different county. Good idea or bad idea? I mean, obviously, the concept of getting people to vote is a good idea, right? But can that all be trusted is what I think a lot of people will be asking. J.D. Vance, who you just heard from, is campaigning in Detroit today. Democratic vice presidential nominee Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota was on Jimmy Kimmel last night.
I'm very proud of what we've done in Minnesota. I ran and won a congressional seat in a very red district for 12 years, and then governor of Minnesota. I think people watched, and we're doing things. I know the Republicans say they're super radical. Yeah, we feed our kids breakfast and lunch at school. It's a radical idea.
Ha, ha, ha. I've lived in the red state of Florida. I talked about this before, where almost all schools, if not all schools, in all districts provide free breakfast to everyone, every child, not only low income. everyone. My kids used to go to high school early. They went early to make sure they didn't miss the free breakfast. Vice President Harris had a big We Hate Trump fest on The View this morning. Donald Trump will make a stop in Joe Biden's hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania tomorrow afternoon, and then have a rally tomorrow night in Reading, PA. President Biden is in Milwaukee today talking about an effort to replace lead pipes, and then he'll head over to Philadelphia to participate in a campaign event for Senator Bob Casey. On Wall Street, stock markets open in the green this morning. Oil is pulling back a bit after several days of running up with all the unrest in the Mideast. MLB playoffs continuing today. Phillies at the Mets, M-E-T-S. Mets. And the Dodgers at the Padres. Both series tied up at 1 apiece. All right, be sure to keep up with all of the news all day and night on Newsmax and at newsmax.com, and make sure you're streaming on Newsmax Plus for the most complete lineup of all your favorite shows and guests. newsmaxplus.com. I'm Tony Marino. Thank you as always for listening to the Newsmax Daily. Continue to share it with your friends and family, or, anyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. If you are in the state of Florida, I will say it again, get prepared. If you are not yet prepared, you are almost out of time. And keep on fighting the good fight.
News breaks every minute, every day. You need the app, the Newsmax app. Find it free on your smartphone store. Then watch us anytime, anywhere.
It's Jerry Callahan from The Callahan Show. You can listen to us every day. We react to the latest news, politics, sports, and all the madness in the world. I'll give you my opinion with a little edge, a little attitude. I'm an unapologetic right-winger, trapped behind enemy lines in deep blue Boston, so I'm used to taking on the mainstream media mob. You can hear us anywhere you get your podcast, or you can listen every day at newsmax.com/listen.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax.